Racing season is coming to an end, and before you put your car away for the winter, here are some things you should consider doing before next spring.
Hi everybody, I'm Dave Goldie from QA1 Motorsports. We're here today to talk about some maintenance you may do to your vehicle before you park it for the season. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the street and drag components, and my friend Marshall is going to talk a little bit about the circle track stuff. And we'll get started as soon as Marshall gets going here.
Yeah, thanks Dave. Like Dave said, I'm Marshall Fegers. I live and breathe circle track racing, and so I'll touch on some of the products you might want to consider upgrading over the off season or replacing. So we're going to kind of start front to back on the car, work our way from the front suspension on to the back. And first things first, your front tie rods, or your tie rod ends. So a lot of cars have rod ends for tie rod ends, and your tie rods, they take a lot of abuse. Every little steering input you do, your rod ends are being loaded and unloaded, and therefore they get a lot of wear. So you want to replace them, or at least consider replacing them with the X series rod end. They're a chromoly rod end with an injection molded race. They start out feeling a little bit tighter than a normal rod end, but they stay that way longer than any other type. So it's a perfect application on the tie rod ends. They get a lot of wear and tear, like I said. They're going to last the longest.
Good point, Marshall. So on the drag side, we have steering linkage, obviously. We have rod ends on some of our steering linkages out there. A lot of cars, especially drag cars, have bump steer kits. So a lot of abuse in the front suspension, especially when a car comes down from wheel stand. Want to make sure the suspension and the steering is working the way it's supposed to. Next, you look at the control arms, the ball joints, the control arm bushings. There's a lot of suspension pieces that need to be looked at and likely need to be maintained throughout the course of the summer. Unfortunately, we're busy racing and all we're looking at is stuff under the hood. So that being said, working, like Marshall said, working to the back of the car, we want to look at the rear suspension. If it's a leaf spring equipped vehicle, we probably have bushings, we have other things in the rear suspension need to be looked at. Shocks, they get overlooked. When the cars are going down to a track, they're in a trailer, generally an enclosed trailer, the suspension is bouncing up and down. It's probably got way more wear on the suspension going to the track than it ever will be at the track. So keep that in mind, the suspension's always moving. If you ever crawl underneath your car after you went on a long tow to undo your tie downs and you touch the shocks on your vehicle, I guarantee you they're warm. It's generating heat going down the road. So again, all the suspension pieces, like Marshall said, from front to rear should be looked at and scrutinized. In the event you're not sure what to do with it, you'll have time to reach out to somebody, maybe an alignment shop or somebody that does that type of work to help figure out if anything needs attention.
Yep, and on the circle track side of things, you want to do a close inspection of your bearings on your shocks, make sure they move nice and free. If they don't, we have new ones that you can replace them with. You just pop the snap rings out, put a new bearing in, don't need a press or anything like that. As well as you want to take a look at the bottom of your shock bodies, make sure there's no oil leaking out. Make sure the piston rod or the shock shafts aren't pitted or damaged. If they are, they can end up causing the shock to leak. And now is the time to either get your shocks all rounded up and sent off to your favorite rebuilder to have them freshened, or acquire the tools and equipment that you need from QA1 to do them yourself. We have everything that you need if you want to freshen them yourself. So don't wait till February, March, April. That's when everybody else sends their shocks in. Do it now. Save your shock rebuilder a little bit of grief. Another thing on the drag side of things, maybe you have single adjustable shocks. You've run a few seasons, maybe now's the time to think about upgrading to the double adjustables or the mod series shock. It's a great time to do your research, call us at QA1, talk to us on the tech line. More than happy to help walk you through any decision you make with shocks.
Good point, good point. And one thing I want to talk about here real quick, you can see there's a couple different colors of springs here. Just recently, we evolved from our silver powder coated spring you see here. A lot of people were looking for different colors of springs for some reason. So black seems to be the go-to color. So just recently we launched a series of springs that are basically the same, but they're black in color. So if somebody's looking for aesthetics, wants a different color, we have different options. One thing that we like to talk about is our high travel springs. So for years we had a standard travel spring, and what that meant is the spring would go solid after it was compressed so much. With a high travel spring, it's got lighter coils, fewer coils, and it can go more travel before it goes solid. So you're going to get all the suspension travel and not let the spring be the limiting factor. So a lot of little tricks to updating to some modern components. And besides the color and the bling, there's a lot of really cool stuff with all the products we're talking about here.
Like Dave mentioned, the ball joints, these take a lot of wear and tear, especially in circle track racing. Now is the time to make sure that none of the studs are bent. And it's also a good idea and good time to completely disassemble them, clean them really good, and then add new grease so that way you're all ready to go next season and your front suspension can move nice and easy as it's designed to.
Good point, Marshall. On the drag side, what a lot of guys and gals are doing is sometimes they'll service their control arms with new kind of an OE grade ball joint. And what happens, Marshall, if you want to just kind of move the ball stud around, if you replace the ball joints with a factory ball joint or a replacement ball joint, you'll see that the ball stud moves real difficult. If you did that type of upgrade over the winter, your car would probably actually work worse come next spring, because if you look at a low friction ball joint, there's no binding in the ball joint, and there's no binding in the suspension. So you put 4 new ball joints in your vehicle, your front end is going to be way more bound up than it would be if you went with a low friction ball joint. So you have 2 options. You can just replace your ball joints with a low friction ball joint like this, or you could upgrade to a tubular control arm. We have a race version one that has low friction ball joints already incorporated in the ball joint, and it has low friction bushings in the shaft. So ideally you want the front end to move pretty freely so you can get the car to weight transfer and get the car to hook up. So a lot of different levels of upgrades, and we're just trying to give you kind of a spin on how you should do these different upgrades and what things you should look at.
Good point, Dave. Another important part of the car, obviously, or arguably the most important, is the drive shaft. Now is a good time to do a close inspection of the entire drive shaft assembly, including the tube yokes and the tube and the U-joints. So those 3 items are critical when it comes to your drive shaft. Of those 3 items, the U-joints are a wear item. So now is a good time, being that it is the off season, to replace the U-joints, and you can do that yourself. They're about $20, $25 a piece, and without using any heat, you can press them out, press the new ones in, using a bench vise if needed. But on the U-joints themselves, if you don't want to replace them completely, at least pull the caps off, all 4 of them, inspect the needles for any damage or any broken ones, maybe they're out of place. And then there's a black plastic thrust washer. It'll either be stuck on the end of the trunnion or on the bottom of the cap. And that is a wear item with temperature and with heat that will eventually melt and disappear, and that will be the beginning of the end of the U-joint. So it's cheap insurance. Either replace the U-joint with a brand new one, or ensure that black plastic thrust washer is still there, and then add a little bit of grease manually.
Good point, Marshall. So on the drag side, for the most part, we're using solid U-joints. So a regular OE U-joint generally has a grease zerk that you can grease it and lubricate it. So in a passenger car, it would last a long time. But in a hardcore racing application, drag race situation, like Marshall pointed out, those are solid U-joints. You cannot lubricate them, cannot grease them unless you take it apart and actually look at it. So again, it's kind of a deal where you don't really know how well it's lubricated unless you take it apart. Also, the reason you want a solid U-joint is it's stronger. If you have a hole in there where grease can go through, the U-joint's weaker. So if you have one of those types of U-joints, probably not a good idea to run it in a hardcore racing application. You'd get a solid U-joint. So let's say you want to service the U-joints. Let's say they have some wear on them. Let's say the slip yoke has some wear on it. Let's say it looks like it's kind of beat up. You've had it in your car for 10 or 15 years, like a lot of us. So what you might want to consider doing, instead of buying a replacement drive shaft, you could go to a carbon fiber drive shaft. Lighter, stronger, faster, nice billet slip yoke, solid U-joints. They're all built in-house, super light, less rotating weight. So it's a safety device. Carbon fiber is safer than anything else out there in case you break the rear end or the pinion yoke or something. So there are some upgrades that you may want to consider doing instead of just doing maintenance. So a lot of things we're talking about here depends on your performance needs and your budget. Sometimes it's best just to get a new piece that would work better in your car instead of just maintaining your old products.
Absolutely. So with that said, just to recap, The off season is a perfect time to perform any upgrades that you want to do product-wise on the car, as well as a perfect time to do maintenance and inspection. As we all have heard a million times, races are won in the shop, and now you have your shop time. Let's get going. Look at that snow coming down.
Like my haircut, I just got done this morning.